Hi, my name's Simon Locke. I'm the founder and CEO of CommunicationsMatch. Today I'm delighted to be with Chris Lynch, Chief Marketing Officer of CISION. We're at the Behind the Scenes at Social Journalism live stream webinar. Chris, you spoke today of the findings of the 2017 Global Social Journalism Study. Can you share what some of the top lines?
Some of the key findings were really around just how much social media is accelerating some of the main challenges that journalists are seeing out in the market today. One being fake news. So that was a huge finding within the study, just that fake news, how it's being proliferated across social journalism is a big problem for a lot of the reporters out there who work at a lot of these outlets that are trying to get fact-based stories out the door and make sure that those are actually coming up and rising through the noise and getting into the hands of readers. So fake news was definitely a major topic that we discussed today. The other thing that I found interesting, on one hand, it's not that surprising to know that journalists have woven social into their day-to-day. I think what was more interesting is to see how many hours a day are now being consumed by journalists. More than 70% say that, hey, I use social every day. Not a surprise, but what was interesting is that 31% said, hey, I'm actually using social on the upwards of 3 to 4 hours a day. So it's really now not just some extra channel where they're distributing content. It's actually a place where they're going and reading other journalists, reading other influencers, maybe even interacting with readers, cultivating different sources. It's really actually impacting their profession in a really profound way. And now that we've had social media around for a number of years, I think they're starting to see that impact on their day-to-day. The other thing that we talked about a bit is just how social is impacting the way journalists look at the efficacy or the overall impact of their stories. Looking at things like the amount of people who share and engage with content was another big finding in the study and something that was fun to discuss today.
Are there any trends that you think are sort of indicative of the future direction of social journalism?
So one of the big trends that I think we're going to see is this idea that presentation matters a lot on how media appears in social, right? One of the big challenges that fake news has presented is often in the eyes of consumers, it can look very similar to news that's coming out from very credible outlets like a Bloomberg or like a New York Times as an example. So it's an interesting kind of confluence of factors. On one hand, you have the journalistic organization that wants to put out a really strong story and make sure it's fact-based. On the other hand, you have the social networks who have sort of unwillingly thrown themselves into the world of editorial. They actually have to go out and say, wow, we have a real problem with fake news that is appearing alongside all of these different more traditional and fact-based news stories. How do we help consumers parse through that? So as we were kind of talking about the go forward pieces, I think that was something that everyone identified as being really important. What is true earned media? Well, true earned media is media that is being generated by people who are not in the employ of a brand, and ideally it is fact-based. Versus now, I think you see a lot of things that might be paid media that's disguised to look like earned, that's being pushed into these social channels. So a lot of implications there, both for the journalistic organizations and the brands that follow them and are looking to get their stories told through that lens as well.
And my last question is, what do you think are a few of the takeaways for communications practitioners? What should they be paying attention to and maybe doing as a result?
If I were a comms professional in this environment, the thing that I would be looking at as it relates to this report is what data or insights can you glean from the different interactions that are happening on social. One of the things that social offers us the ability to do is really understand the sentiment of our audience and what matters to them. And comms professionals have access to a lot of data about the end user that they're ultimately trying to reach through the journalist or through the influencer. And if they look at that data and they look at what those end users are actually saying on social channels, it actually might impact their overall outreach strategy. If they know their end users are engaging in a particular pocket of social media, then it might change who they decide to do outreach to in the first place. It's very easy as a comms professional to get very focused on the relationship that you might already have with a certain set of journalists that you know you can go and pitch, or get focused on outlet popularity. Maybe your executive says, I want to be in the Wall Street Journal, right? Well, that's great. And there are some really fantastic ways that you can get in front of those types of outlets. But what I would submit is that when it comes to social media, you have this opportunity to think a little bit more broadly than that. And you look at some of these influencers on social media, while they might not have the same following or size as a New York Times or a Wall Street Journal, as an example, they might have a high saturation of your target and end user audience. So my big takeaway for the comms professional in this is to look at that data, don't run away from it, because it's going to help you do your job better.
Chris, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.